Interview of one, take one, Mark.
Okay, so we're rolling. First thing I need, how do I say and spell your first and last name?
First name is Patrick, Patrick. Last name Montgomery, Montgomery.
And just to get to know you a little bit, where are you from and what have you done for work throughout your life?
Yeah, originally I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up in an outdoors family. My dad was big into the outdoors, fishing, rafting, hunting, those kind of things. We trained a lot of dogs, field trial dogs, black labs, and pretty much spent, normal childhood. I came from a fairly religious, background and upbringing. My mom was a Bible study fellowship teaching leader. My older brother, he's actually a preacher for Calvary Chapel up in Minnesota right now.
Would you describe yourself as being politically involved throughout your life?
I wouldn't say politically involved. I feel like I was educated, fairly well through middle school and high school. Had the opportunity to study, civics, how our government works. Was taught American history, introductory, to our Constitution and, kind of what our founding fathers envisioned for that, but not political. I've never been to a protest. Probably the most political thing that I've done is just voting like, any normal American.
Is it okay if I ask, are you a lifelong Republican?
Yeah, no, absolutely, you can ask. I would say that, I was definitely raised, as a conservative, and that tends to fall in line with more of the Republican values. I would say that as I matured and also, took some other job opportunities and, hung out with some different types of people, I would probably, became more of a libertarian probably than anything. I don't believe really in a two-party political system. I would like to have a couple more choices out there and to break up, some of these major voting blocks. But even in like 2016, I was not a Trump fan. I didn't vote for Trump. There was a libertarian candidate, Governor Gary Johnson out of New Mexico, which is where I raised, and that was kind of my guy, for the 2016 election.
I want to get to what it feels like to be pardoned, but first, just on the heels of that, what changed? What made you start supporting Trump?
To be honest with you, I felt like he did a good job, his first time around. I was definitely swinging, into being one of his supporters. About the time when COVID came along, that's when I really, due to those lockdowns and, not being able to run my business and seeing how that affected other people's business to me, that was a violation of our civil rights, and the Constitution's supposed to protect that. So I started studying, started paying a little bit more attention to what was going on around me.
Remind me, how many years have you been a guide?
I've been guiding since I was 16 years old up in Alaska, so 30, 35, I don't know, I'm 52 now, so whatever that is, 35 years maybe.
What did it feel like to be pardoned?
Well, obviously it was a relief. It was something that I didn't know for sure if it was going to come. I knew it was going to come for some people. I didn't know if I would fall into that category just because, the one charge that I still, was finally convicted of. I was originally indicted on 5 charges and that grew to 10. And, at the end of the day, I was found guilty on 2 of them. One of them was dismissed, what they call the 15-12 charge. It ended up being dismissed by the Supreme Court. I just ended up having the one charge to deal with.
What was your initial reaction to the results of the 2020 election?
I kind of saw what was happening. My wife and I were watching it on TV, and I knew that we were going to be in trouble. I wasn't one of these people that, going to bed thought that we had won the election and then woke up surprised that we hadn't. I was very aware that because of all the mail-in ballots that had been, issued, without request to many of the, voters in states that don't originally, that's not within their state legislation to do their elections that way, that it was going to take a long time to count them. And I knew that they hadn't counted them, prior to the election or the polling results. So I had a good feeling that when we woke up in the morning that, the votes were going to be swung in a different way.
Did you believe those election results were accurate?
I didn't know, and unfortunately, I don't think that I still know. And that was my problem. I wanted there to be some transparent investigations. There was definitely enough cases of people talking about fraud and irregular machine results and flipping numbers of machines. That wasn't something that I put a lot of stock into, but I knew at the very least that there are several of the key swing states had, again, they issued, they went to a total mail-in ballot system like we have here in Colorado, but their legislation, wasn't set up for that, and there's a difference. Colorado, that's how we do it all the time. These other states, they did that because of COVID, and I found that to be, in violation of their own constitution.
It doesn't sound like, though, you would classify yourself as, quote unquote, an election denier.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, numbers speak for themselves, right? Joe Biden got more votes than Donald Trump. My issue is how we got to those numbers, and I felt that for the sake of election integrity, that it need to be investigated, and that was our hope, in going to the Capitol on January 6th, is that we were going to root for Congress to not certify the election. We felt like they had the constitutional means to do that, and just put a pause on it for maybe 10 days. Let there be a little bit more investigation. If that came back that we had to rehold some elections in some of these states that had violated their own rules, then, I felt like we should do that in the best interests of the whole country. You start having a lot of doubt in our election results, I think it's going to, cause a lot of problems for future elections.
Do you feel confident in the results from 2024?
I'm sure that there was still, some, variance, both back and forth. I'm not saying this is a one-party, ordeal. It's politics. Everybody's gonna scratch and fight and claw for every, vote that they can get in their favor. But I think because it was so overwhelmingly, I was surprised, to be honest with you, by what the results actually were. And it's been a long time since a Republican candidate has won the popular vote. So in that sense, I'm very grateful. I mean, I think it was a unanimous decision, and we didn't see, much, contesting of those results. So I have to feel like, it was maybe a little bit more fair.
You already touched on this a bit, but what was your intent when you were traveling to be at the U.S. Capitol for January 6th? What did you believe would play out?
Well, I was going there to go to a rally, by the Washington Monument, the big tall, pony building that everyone sees, that big park. I think it's the National Mall. I'm not an expert on geography within Washington, D.C. system, but that's what we originally signed up to go for. It wasn't something that I had planned to go to. One of my friends called me, about Christmas time and asked me, hey, I'm going to this rally for Donald Trump. You want to come with me? At first, my answer was no. I just couldn't really afford to do that after being locked down, all of 2020 long. He made the counteroffer that, he was going to pay my way. And so for me, it was a free trip to Washington, D.C. I've never been there before. I wanted to see some of the sites, but I also wanted to, show support for a man that I didn't start off supporting. I thought he had done enough job and earned our respect, and that, enough that I wanted to, basically kind of thank him for the job that he had done on his way out of office.
When you woke up that morning, you're in D.C., I imagine.
Would you have ever expected what happened to happen?
No, not at all. Again, I hadn't done a lot of online research. I didn't know much about it. It wasn't until we actually got into D.C., started talking to some of the other people that were there, that we became, knowledgeable of that there was going to be a march, if you will, down to the Capitol after Donald Trump finished speaking, and that's what we were going to do. We were there to root on Congress, encourage them to make what we felt was the right choice and just not certify the election for a little while. It wasn't something, it was never part of our intention to try to interrupt that vote. That was a vote that most people understood was necessary to happen. It doesn't make any sense that we would try to interfere with that and try to keep that from happening. when both sides would. That had to happen. You know, we wanted a different result, but we definitely didn't want to stop that vote from happening.
Did you see a moment where things changed, where the crowd's temperament maybe changed, or was there a tipping point?
Yeah, there was, you know, in my opinion, there was a very key tipping point. You know, when we first arrived on the Capitol grounds, it was about, you know, maybe 1:35, 1:40. We were unaware that earlier in the day, you know, at approximately 12 p.m., there was other people that had never gone, you know, to see Donald Trump. They were there specifically for the protests. They believed they held permits, you know, for those protests. Here, just a second.
Yeah, no, you're good. Feel free. Let Pepper in.
We'll see if she'll just stay there for a little while.
I had asked, did you see, and you said yes, so we'll just kind of pick this back up. Was there a moment where you saw things change, or was there a tipping point? And can you kind of explain what that was?
Yeah, so like we were saying, there was already events going on there that the people coming from Trump's rally were unaware of. We marched, you know, walked from there in a happy mood, didn't realize that already at the Capitol building there was, you know, other events, you know, going on. As soon as we got there, we didn't realize that as soon as we walked onto the Capitol grounds that we all of a sudden became apparently guilty of trespassing. We didn't see any signs that told us that we weren't supposed to be there. These areas were also supposedly, you know, the areas that were permitted originally for the protests. So when we got on the Capitol grounds, it didn't really seem like anything was, you know, amiss. But, you know, very soon as we got closer to the west side, you know, that the big stage, the sound stage that you see set up there, yeah, you know, you could hear, you know, loud bangs. You could begin to start to smell, you know, the CS gas and other chemical agents that were being used. And yeah, you know, you could tell that something wasn't right necessarily.
Did you think about turning around?
Yeah, I was a little confused in the moment because of the instructions that we had received from, you know, Donald Trump. He said he was going to meet us there and there was going to be this big rally. So the stuff that, you know, later we found out had been set up for the inauguration that was coming up, I originally took that as being set up for the protest that day. There was a big sound tower with a lot of lights and stuff on it. There had been some bleachers that had been set up that were wrapped in plastic. So I took that as that was the spot where we were supposed to be. And it wasn't until the next day that I was even, you know, became aware that actually they had pushed some barriers, you know, in earlier in the day and that people had moved up to those areas.
When you stormed the Capitol, were you met with resistance?
No, not initially. You know, there wasn't a lot of police officers in that immediate area. You know, again, we were 150 feet away from the front and center of that west stage area. We were trying to avoid that. You know, that seemed to be where most of the activity was at, you know, as far as, you know, CS gas. And pretty soon they started throwing, you know, and I mean the Capitol police officers and the Metropolitan police officers that showed up, you know, they started throwing, you know, CS gas, flashbang grenades, concussion grenades, and, you know, into the crowd. Anti-riot, you know, type munitions, you know, into the crowd. And at that point, you know, things started to become, you know, escalated. But the turning point that you asked at, the one specific point, was there was a lot of people there that were present that had, you know, megaphones, you know, bullhorns. Who these people were, I don't really know. But at kind of around the same time, they started making announcements that Mike Pence had certified the election, that it was over, that certification process had been complete. And at that point, I think, you know, the crowd, you know, became a little bit more angry. You know, they were hoping that Mike Pence was going to be their savior, if you would, and that he would agree to not certify that election. Personally, I don't think he had that power, you know, exclusively. I think that belonged to, you know, more of the Congress and House of Representatives. So, but yeah, that was a turning point. You know, people went from being hopeful to being let down. People didn't show up there that day saying, you know, hang Mike Pence. You know, they were rooting for him. And that's when everything kind of switched, is when people believed that certification process was over. Now, in fairness, that didn't turn out to be true at all, you know. But none of us, at least I wasn't sitting watching my phone. You know, I didn't have the benefit of, you know, the 30,000 foot view, you know, and the TV cameras and the different angles. That we could only deal with our immediate environment and what was going on in front of us.
Explain the altercation with a law enforcement officer.
Yeah, so there came a point when, you know, in that process, again, we weren't really in a confrontational, you know, setting with the police officers. We were moved away from that, but I believe it's Platoon 42, which included Officer Daniel Hodges. You know, they came and they were responding to that west side area into, you know, there was a skirmish line, there were some barriers that had been set up, and I believe that they had been called to provide backup, you know, for that area.
What happened with your altercation with that?
Well, as like I said, we were standing there. We didn't have any police presence immediately where we were, but we could hear some, you know, some cheers and, you know, some more jeers, you know, these people, you know, and we couldn't really see what was going on, but it became apparent that Platoon 42 was making its arrival. They were in all their hard gear, their riot gear, so, you know, they had their batons out. A lot of them had face masks on, you know, they're all wearing, you know, arm guards, you know, full body gear and helmets, and they were marching, you know, through the crowd. And it became apparent that, you know, pretty quickly that there was too many people there. It was too densely packed. You know, they made a tactical mistake trying to approach that way. You know, I feel like they would have been better off had they made a circle around and supported their skirmish line, if you will, from the rear. But somebody made the decision that they were going to cut through the crowd. The crowd became, you know, too densely packed for them to get through it. And at that time, some of the officers decided that, you know, they had to force their way through the crowd. And by force, I mean they were using their batons, you know, to push people back. Most people had their backs turned to these officers when they arrived, and the first contact that they had with these officers was getting slammed in their back, you know, with a baton. You know, the people didn't particularly like it that much. And, you know, they pushed back, you know, they trying to tell the officers, hey, listen, you know, we're on your side, you know, it's the same team. We're not here to have a confrontation with you. But you also, at the same time, you know, we have a First Amendment right to protest, and you guys can't, you know, force us, you know, out of the way, you know, just kind of chill out. And they did. They stopped. We weren't part of that initial, you know, group. Some other protesters, you know, at least they were dressed like protesters. I don't know, you know, if they were actually protesters or Antifa members, but they were being, you know, pretty vocal, you know, with the police officers. My friend, you know, Brady, decided that, you know, he thought that maybe he could jump in there and kind of keep the peace. He approached the officers, you know, was asking them, hey, you know, same team, aren't you our brothers? We're all Americans here. This is not what we want to happen, but you guys gotta calm down a little bit. And at that point in time, I came with him. You know, it was loud. It was a very, you know, heated environment, you know, so you had to yell back and forth. And, you know, but the things we were saying is like, hey, you know, we're on your side, you know, don't do this. You can't attack American citizens. And, you know, finally at that point, you know, Hodges made a decision that he needed to push through the crowd and said, move, make way. You can see on his body cam where I stepped back, I created a hole. You know, I felt like I was obeying his direct order to get out of the way, allowed him to pass. When he left, the other officers didn't go with him. You know, their higher ups, if you will, their sergeants that were in the back of the group were making the recommendation that they needed to fall back, that they needed to go around another way. The end result was, you know, Daniel Hodges, he got separated. And when he looked back and realized that he was by himself, I think, you know, that maybe he was a little bit afraid, you know, maybe a little bit of panic, you know, stepped in, and he made his way and tried to get back with his other group of officers. At this point, he began grabbing people from behind by their backpacks, you know, throwing them down to the ground. He had his baton in his left hand. It looked like he was striking some of these people, you know, in the back of their heads and on their shoulders as he grabbed them. You know, bodies were definitely, you know, falling to the floor. As he made his way back towards me again, I tried to back up. I couldn't move. I was pinched basically between two walls and in a gate there. There was really nowhere for me to go to. As he got closer, another protester stepped in and tried to get him to calm down a little bit, and he, took his baton and took 2 swings at this guy, hit him in the rib cage. And when he turned back towards me, he lifted his baton, and at that point I, feel like I acted instinctually to grab onto that baton. I didn't want that baton. I wasn't trying to grab the baton. I wasn't angry with Officer Hodges, at that moment. I was just, in fact, I don't even really remember making a decision to do it. As soon as I did and had the baton in my one hand, I wasn't trying to grab it out, but I didn't know what to do at that time. I literally felt like I kind of had the tiger by the tail, if you will, and so I held on to the baton. The crowd surged in our direction, pushing us both down to the ground. I fell down. Hodges was on top of me. He was trying to fight for the possession of that baton, and I felt in that instance that if I let go of the baton at that moment, that I could be in serious jeopardy. I began to get hit by some of the other officers that had their batons while I was on the ground. So I rolled over on my back in a defensive position and kind of got my feet up where I could use them to, basically just try to keep a little space. And I did. I pushed off Daniel Hodges' shoulder. That's what they're referencing when they're saying that I kicked Hodges in the chest. I don't really consider that a kick. If you listen to Hodges' testimony that he gave to the House Select Committee, his story is that first I kicked him in the chest, and then I went after him and grabbed his baton, and was trying to wrestle it from him. And, to me, that's not the same event that I was there for.
This question was asked to President Donald Trump just yesterday, I believe. Is it ever okay to assault a law enforcement officer?
It's never okay to assault a law enforcement officer. Now, in order to understand what assault actually is, we have to break down, the laws of self-defense. And we have to understand where those laws of self-defense come from. A lot of people believe that it's our United States Constitution that gives us our rights, and that the government somehow plays a part in making an agreement with what kind of rights we, the people, are going to have. But that's not actually the way it works, In my opinion, anyways, and our founding fathers, they say our rights are natural, they come from our Creator, and the job of the Constitution is to protect those rights. So, in the spirit of, natural rights, I have a right to protect myself. Especially against a police officer that I feel like is not acting in the legal performance of their duties. It's a fine line. But I felt like these officers entered into our space, making them the aggressors. They weren't there to make any arrests. They didn't make any arrests. In fact, after the incident happened, they didn't even file any incident reports. It's mandatory that when they're involved with using a weapon, whether it be their baton or actual firearm, they have to file an incident report and report it. And none of those officers in that instance did that. So, I don't know if that was, on purpose, or is just the fact that with everything else that happened that day, that incident itself may not have, registered with them as something that they needed to report. But they didn't report them. The event happened. I felt like I was defending myself. I wasn't trying to hurt Hodges. I'm sorry that it happened, but also there's a saying, it's better to be, judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Do you regret anything from that day?
Yeah, there's definitely, things that I regret. I regret, going into the building. We weren't some of the protesters that were on the front lines, breaking into the building. People have different opinions about that, and I have my own, but I can't really speak about it too much because that's not where I was at, and that wasn't my experience. We were actually trying to, once people started going up the stairs, we followed the crowd. We removed ourselves from the people that were going towards those entrances, and we had literally climbed up in some bleachers just overlooking the crowd, trying to just calm down a little bit. It was obviously it was a wild event. It was hard to believe, very surreal, saddening in a lot of ways, that our country had got to a point where this was actually happening. And while we were in that process, There's a door that opened from what they call it the Upper West Terrace door, and there's a lot of videos about this, on the internet. A protester, it wasn't the police that opened the door. A protester came out and he asked those that were standing there nearby if we wanted to come into the building. My answer at that time was, no, I don't want to come into the building. I don't think that's a good idea at all, to be honest with you. And that's what the discussion that we had with my co-defendants that were there, man. Should we go in the building? Do we want to go into the building? And I don't think that we did. And then the guy that was holding the door open told us that, no, the police are right here inside. They're saying that it's okay. They're saying that we can come in. Now, whether or not they said it was okay, I kind of doubt it, but we decided to, look for ourselves. We looked in the building before entering it. There was definitely, 10 to 15 officers standing just inside the doorway. We could look down a short hall and they were holding open some interior doors. Police officers standing there letting people, go by, and that gave us the impression that, yes, it was indeed okay. Later in the day, I was able to talk to some officers and ask them, hey, are you guys really letting people in the building? And in their defense, their answer was, well, we didn't actually let people into the building. But we've decided at this point, we're going to allow you guys to have your protest as long as it remains peaceful. Don't destroy anything. And if at some point we make an announcement and tell you guys that you have to leave, you have to leave. And to me, that seemed fair enough. So we made the decision to go into the building, not to try to interfere with a certification vote that we believe to have already been stopped, but to simply, have a peaceful protest. And, it was obvious that there wasn't enough officers there, to protect the inside of the building. To me, that building is, a very sacred place. It's not something that I wanted to see the inside ransacked and destroyed. And then there was also a curiosity, point. I'd never been in the Capitol before. If they were going to let us in there, why not? But at the end of the day, I wish I hadn't. I wish I hadn't believed that. I knew those officers were probably under a little duress, in that situation. My intentions were not to make that worse. If anything, it was try to make it better. But, things didn't get better.
Safe to say then you would not do it again?
I would not do it again, no. I would still probably go to the protest. I would have maybe paid a little bit better attention to some of the early warning signs that things were amiss and tried to stay out of that situation altogether. I think just by the amount of people that were there, it would have been a very, moving protest, and maybe a lot more effective if it hadn't gone the way that it did. But also at the end of the day, that January 6th, it's hard to say. It may have played an integral part in waking up the American people, to the fact that, things are not all well, with our federal government, and, maybe bring some unity, to we the people again.
Some words that have been used to describe January 6th include attack, riot, insurrection, and threat to democracy. How do you describe that day?
All of those words probably within the big umbrella, might be fairly accurate. It was a very complex ordeal. There was different things going on in different places. A lot of people had different motives for what they were doing. My motive was not to, participate in any type of riot or to try to break into the building. I would say is what happened there was, a protest, a very large protest that was allowed to get out of control. I think it could have been stopped. I think it should have been prevented. And, the higher brass, if you will, those are the people that are passing the buck to everyone else. And I think there needs to be a closer look at the people that were actually in charge that day and see where their failures were.
I was about to ask, who do you think could have had the power to stop that momentum?
Well, I know for a fact that Donald Trump, made suggestions that, hey, I've invited a lot of people. There's going to be lots of people here. So let's get the National Guard involved. He had them there. They were on standby between Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Muriel Bauer. I believe that they're the ones, that maybe denied having those guards, become active and be there. the fencing that they set up there on that day, they knew that they had given out permits, at least 4 permits, for people to have protest on the Capitol grounds. If they were going to stop that from happening, they could have put up something more than 3-foot high barrier bike racks. The next day they had 10-foot tall interlocking black fences. Why didn't we just start with that? And that's what they start with now. That's what they started with on this past inauguration. And guess what? The same thing hasn't happened. So I think it could have been prevented. I think it wasn't. I'm not going to get into on whether I thought it was done on purpose, but I will say that at the very least it was done by negligence.
I was going to ask, we just saw a peaceful transition of power. Did that make you feel any differently about January 6th? I'm not sure if that would have played a role, but did it?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely nice to see that, and that's the way that things should have been done normally. I think had judges, paid a little bit more attention to, the claims of some of the voter fraud, and at least agreed to investigate it a little bit more, maybe there wouldn't have been such of a heated atmosphere. Maybe people would have felt like things had been a little bit more fair. But it was unique. We've never dealt with COVID type situation before. I felt like that was being somewhat, overstated and used, to intentionally try to affect the results of the election that year. We had some things that, we didn't get to talk about, Hunter Biden's laptop. That was dismissed immediately, and I think that would have, had that been reported on accurately, it may have changed some people's minds and some votes about putting his father, in charge of running the country. The whole Russia, collusion scam, to me, that is an attempt to interfere with an election. Not any different, than what they accused us of.
What has been the fallout from all of this for you?
Well, my life, personally, it's been a wreck. Obviously, it's for my wife. She wasn't expecting anything like that whatsoever. I've lost my business. I've lost my job. My bank, instantly canceled my accounts. And it voluntarily gave all my information to the FBI with no search warrants. I spent 4 years on home incarceration with an ankle bracelet around my ankle. 2 years, first 2 years I wasn't even allowed to leave my house. And then I spent another 2 years where they gave me a curfew where I could go to work. But my biggest thing is my reputation amongst my colleagues and my friends within my industry. A lot of that has come into question. My business doesn't operate, now. I was under sanctions that prohibited me from, guiding, and doing my job. My wife, it's been extremely stressful for her. She has kind of a high-profile job here within the Denver community, and of course she was scared to death that she was going to be, targeted and, maybe lose her job. And, she's a big, what am I saying? She is the bigger breadwinner in our family. Without her income and without my income, we would have been absolutely sunk. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, J6ers that are in that position now. They got out of prison. Yeah, they got out, but they also got out to nothing. They don't have a home. They don't have a support system other than the J6. There's been a community that has risen up because of this and have united, and they're reaching out and they're, taking care of these people. But, I feel lucky that, I've been blessed, as much as I have through all this.
You spent roughly a month in prison?
Yeah, it was a month. So not as long as some of these people. Some of these people have been locked up since day one. But it was enough to understand that that's not where I wanted to spend another 36 months. So I'm very grateful, for the opportunity, to get out of there and, to get on with my life. If I hadn't, I did 4 years on home incarceration, another 3 years in prison, followed by another 3 years on, supervised probation. I'm looking at 10 years of my life. Some can say, that I deserve to be punished. I feel like I have been. I don't feel like I got out of this, scot-free, 4 years I was on home incarceration, and I didn't get any credit for that. It's not like state time, well, they'll give you some credit for some time served, but, we asked for it from the judge. Judge said no, so, that's a long time.
Did you feel you deserved to be punished?
At the very beginning of it, there was some things that I felt like, some of the misdemeanor crimes that I was absolutely, willing to plead guilty to. Things that could say that maybe we were guilty of according to the law, but it was done on accident, as far as trespassing on Capitol grounds. I didn't realize that we were on I knew we were on Capitol grounds, but I didn't realize we weren't supposed to be there. We thought that's where we were supposed to be. Parading and demonstrating inside the Capitol building. I didn't feel like we entered unlawfully or illegally, which were some of the other charges. But parading and demonstrating, I guess, if we went there to have a protest, that it would fall under that category. Again, that's a misdemeanor, infraction. I don't believe like my behavior and most of the January 6th, defendants' behavior added up to felonies and to, lives destroyed. I just don't see it the same way as some other people do, I guess.
What would you want people who watch this to really take away from what you're saying today?
Well, they've been spoon-fed, a certain version of the story. And it's hard to, reprogram and rewire people that have come to a conclusion. The January 6th committee, they got to speak, and, those officers, including Daniel Hodges, got to give his testimony about what happened with no cross-examination. Nobody to rebut what they were saying, and that very quickly became fact. They said it was an insurrection, and that's what a lot of people, believe that it was. So I would just ask them to, open your mind. I try to find, I look at some stuff, from a right-leaning view, some stuff from a left-leaning view, and then I try to make a educated decision based on what is probably common sense, and that lays in the middle. So, there's a lot of J6ers out there that have got stories just like mine. This is the first time we're finally being able to tell them, and before just writing us off, and give us a chance to speak our truth.
Let me just reference and see if I've missed anything. I know I've kept you for a long time. I do apologize. We've covered everything. There was one question I had on here. Some Republicans have said they just can't agree with these pardons, especially for those convicted of crimes against police officers.
Right. My answer to that would be, in the interest of having fair trials as guaranteed by our Constitution, none of us were granted a fair trial. In my opinion, we all put in for a change of venue motion. I think Washington, D.C., and especially the federal judges that live there, were also witnesses to the event that day. I think it was just too charged an environment for them to be able to be non-biased. And, so we didn't get to move those venues. The judges, had already come to the conclusion that we were all guilty. The jurors had all come to the conclusion that we were all guilty. We were unlawfully charged with what they call the 1512 charge, which is interfering with an official proceeding, which was originally made, to stop, witness tampering or destroying evidence. An official proceeding had to be a courtroom hearing with a judge and with a finding of guilt. The certification of Congress was not that, and that's what the Supreme Court decided. They ended up dropping that charge. Well, as that's one of my charges, and I'm facing a potential of 20 years on it, I've got to do some other wheeling and dealing, especially knowing that I can't go to trial with a jury because they've found everybody 100% guilt. So we had to cut some deals. I ended up taking what they call a stipulated bench trial, where I agreed to some of the facts. But even in my own trial, I was never allowed to make an argument for self-defense purposes. The judge, I agreed that I grabbed onto the baton. I agreed that my foot physically touched Officer Hodges. I was not given a chance to add the context that, I felt I was acting, within my rights as a citizen to defend myself. He took it as that I admitted, you know, that I assaulted the police officer, and I wasn't allowed to give an explanation why. So it played out the way that it did.
Do you have any questions, Anaya?
I think you covered it all.
Is there anything you feel like I specifically did not give you a chance to say?
I feel pretty good about it. You know, it's, if there's anything else I want people to know is just that, you know, we do have remorse. I mean, what happened that day was a bad experience for our country. You know, my hope in sharing this is that we can begin to heal from it, you know, as a country. But I don't think that we're going to be able to do that as long as we keep putting American citizen against American citizen. We are the United States of America, and when we act that way and behave that way, we are a stronger America, and it benefits all of us. And that's where I'm hoping to get back to.